the mayor has called the special council meeting to order. Mayor Davey.
Here.
Councilmember Laredo.
Here.
Councilmember London.
Here.
Vice Mayor McCormick. Here. Councilmember Moss.
Here.
Councilmember Petros.
Here.
And Councilmember Figueroa. We do have a quorum, Mayor. If we may please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, I apologize. Father Pagwawa was unable to make it this evening. Next item is brief comments by council.
My only comment is, I know Councilmember Laredo worked for him, but we have a number of members of our community who are family members of Mayor Ferre and his passing this week. He was a tremendous force in the city of Miami and in the county, and I think people like him did us great service by what they did for the city of Miami, so I think it's to be commended. There's a service on Thursday. Unfortunately, I cannot attend. If anybody can attend, I think it would be a good thing for the village to show their respect. We have, I believe we've now lowered the flag to half staff through Thursday, so thank you very much for doing that.
I was going to suggest if the council agrees to issue a proclamation. I understand we have proclamations declaring Maurice Ferre Day or Maurice Ferre Appreciation Day to be delivered to his family on our behalf.
Well, I think that's a great idea. Okay.
Yes, sir. Next item, public comment.
Okay, we have 3 people signed up. Understand that the item tonight before us is really, the only one is amending the 2018 budget for the fire, the transportation fees. So if you'd like to wait and speak to the budget, that's coming up next. So if anybody's not here for this item, you can wait until the next one. It's up to you. But Jan, you wait. Bill,
I can go now.
you want to go now? Okay. Please.
Bill Durham, 230 Seaview Drive. First of all, I want to thank you all for taking the time to serve on the council. I know it's probably a lot of headaches and the accolades are probably few, so thank you for doing the job you do. I know a lot of you have a lot of experience, and it's a diverse group, right? And diversity's good because we have a lot of different opinions and a lot of different experiences we can draw on. But sometimes this diversity that is a good thing for us can kind of get in our way, you know? And it's like, hey, why doesn't so-and-so agree with me? Or why can't they see my point of view? And so I just wanted to talk about the importance of laughter. You know, when you see kids playing in the playground, they laugh all the time. And it's very healthy and therapeutic to laugh. But most of us as adults, you know, we don't have much of a chance to laugh, really. I mean, we're doing serious stuff. So we have to kind of make room for a little bit of laughter in our daily work, in the work we're doing here. We got to find a little humor, you know. My original meditation teacher used to say something like, treat simple things with great seriousness. So it's like if I'm washing the dishes, I'm really focusing on washing the dishes. If I'm eating an apple, I'm really focused on eating that apple, right? So my mind doesn't wander off and play games. But the reverse side of that is if we're doing something really serious, then we gotta treat it kind of lightly, or we take it too seriously, and we can't see the humanity of the people we're working with. And our coworkers a lot of times have a lot to offer. So just run through the exercise real quick. It helps if you stand up. You put your hands kind of behind your back. You guys can do it out here if you want, or you don't have to, but it's a good exercise. Sure. Do it. Put your hands kind of on your shoulder blades, and you kind of lean back, And you have to force yourself to laugh at first. 'Cause, you know,
I don't think at this point I have to force myself to laugh.
but, you know, you just, you know, you really have to find this laugh. It really is kind of beneficial. Chief, come on up here for a second.
Uh-oh.
I enlisted my old friend, Chief Lang, to help me out here. So you could use this exercise kind of like this. Say we're having a discussion, and I'm saying, hey, I'm right.
No, I'm right.
No, I'm right.
Well, you taught me how to ride a bike, so I'm right.
I lived here 40 years. I'm right.
Me too. I'm right.
So then at some point, you know, you just, it just turns into like a funny exchange, right? And because it's silly, you know, and it's another opportunity to laugh. So it's just. So it seems kind of silly, and I'm sorry if I wasted your time, but I think it's really important stuff, right? There's nothing more important than our health. And if we take all this stuff too seriously, you know, bottom line, it's not good for us.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
Bill.
great one. Ann, did you want to go now or do you want to wait?
I'll go now.
Okay.
I would like to comment on Bill. When I was going through all the stuff with Jim, the doctors always said, we know exactly what room you're in all the time because there's an enormous amount of laughter coming from it. But I am always right. I'm here this evening to talk about something. We've been given an opportunity to start a pop-up museum. It'll be located at 200 Village Hall. The foundation recently vacated the space. After all, people without knowledge of their history is like a tree without roots. The site is close to the school. They can walk over for a short field trip. It's an opportunity to volunteer. The kids can get wanted hours for volunteer, as well as seniors. The chamber suggested even making a combination trip with the Park Lighthouse, the museum, and a local restaurant. It's close to the community center, so residents can pop in anytime. It's great service for this community as well as the tourist. It's within walking distance of the Ritz-Carlton. The museum is a place where nothing was lost, everything was just rediscovered. I hope I have the support of the council and the village on this project. We're in the process of planning it and going forward. If you have any questions, my phone number's been the same for 50 years, so call me up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. All right. Okay,
Next item, Mayor, is consent agenda.
moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next item is an ordinance on second reading, an ordinance of the Village of Key Biscayne, Florida, amending ordinance number 2018-7, which adopted the budget for fiscal year 2018-2019 by revising the 2018-2019 fiscal year operating budget, providing for implementation and providing for an effective date.
Moved.
Thank you.
Let's start the discussion.
What
Councilmember
is the
Moss?
pension? Oh,
I'm sorry.
Quick question. The $1.9 million that we have there, is that inside the is that reserve inside the general funds?
It is a reserve in the general fund, yes.
Okay, and that will affect our bond rating if we move that money, all of it, because I think there's a 30%. Let's rephrase it. How much money do we have in our general reserves cash?
Great question. Do we want to maybe frame what we're talking about, frame the discussion?
No, that was the
Yeah,
question.
so the thing is that the general fund's cash amount is what the rating agencies are going to look at based
For our
on
bond.
our expenses for our bond rating. This will be an effect in that if it's in our general fund's cash account. So what I want to know is how much do we have in our general fund's cash right now, so we can see what this is, how this is going to affect that.
So your unrestricted, totally available general fund balance is about $5 million. This is an assigned fund balance, so it falls into a bucket where there is an intent behind the money that the fire transport fees be used for fire rescue services.
Okay, but we need at least about $13 million to hold our AAA bond rating, which is crosses that threshold. So whether it's restricted or unrestricted, I think they still look at that cash amount. Is that correct?
So in a review for the bond rating analysis, there are several factors that are considered, and your fund balance and your available funds are definitely one of the things that are looked at.
Just a quick question. What happened? Okay, we had, how much do we have in land acquisition?
About 7.4 million in
Okay,
land
right.
acquisition.
So 7.4, that was in the general fund, correct?
Correct. And
Okay.
it's
And so that should be that should be in general fund, right?
so it's from the credit agency's perspective, whether it's in general fund or whether
Assigned.
it's in its own, whether it's in a separate fund, it's still available and it's still funding that the village has that is able to pledge. So whether it sits in one bucket or the other, it still can be counted toward your available reserves for bond analysis.
Just real quick, so okay, maybe I misunderstood then, because my understanding was that the monies had to be in general fund in order, we need a 30%, what's the rule?
I think it's 30% on
Of
our
what?
our general expenditures.
General
That's what I
expenditures.
understand, but.
Chris, you're going to speak to that?
Chris Wallace, interim CFO for the village. So we'll address the Parks and Recreation Open Space Fund first. It had been part of the general fund, but the ordinance that enabled it really requires it to be set aside. The money can be used, however, in the event of an emergency. So it is kind of a supplemental rainy day fund, the way you have it constructed. But it is an earmark for Parks and Recreation and open space. But if you had an emergency, you could use it, but you'd have to replenish it in very short order.
But as is this one, this money's earmarked for fire.
The original, the fire EMS fee, the transport fee is what it was adopted in 2005. The enabling legislation on that was to help offset the cost of fire services. In my reading of it and in my experience, that money should never have been committed or reserved. It just should have been general money available for fire services and to offset the cost of rescue services in the fire department.
But it wasn't. We set it aside.
Right. It has been set aside, and we should change the nature of the reserve because it was the council's intent last fall to use that money for a reduction of pension costs, to help reduce the unfunded liability of the plan after some changes to the plan. So we did change the nature of the reserve to reflect the fact that it was the elected body's intent to use it in the next budget year, kind of like an appropriation of fund balance, if you will. Addressing your larger concern, I personally think that your reserve should be about 50% of your expenditures. That's on the high
But
side.
the question, I'm sorry, but and not to disrespect your opinion on that, but what we're talking about is the bond rating. The concern is we don't want to fall below 30% because that will impact our bond rating, correct?
Well, yeah, I think it would, along with other things. It's not the sole determinant.
It's not.
of your
I
bond
understand
rating.
that, but that is a determinant fact. That is one factor that will go toward our bond rating, right? That's. I mean,
I
our
would
bond
think so,
counsel
sure,
has told
sure.
us that's a concern. So, I'm a little concerned. To Brett's point, what happens if this comes out? What does this?
It decreases our liabilities.
Right.
Also, which is a factor.
But, well,
That you have to pay.
But I guess if I think this should. Well, Ed, you make your point and then go back.
I have one question for you, Chris. Among all the reserves we have, restricted, assigned, unrestricted, unassigned, from a credit standpoint, what is evidently never usable in determining our credit rating?
I'm sorry, what is?
In other words, you have all these, we'll call them buckets for lack of something better, and all these buckets, A, B, C, and D. Now we have, from a credit standpoint, we're issuing bonds, getting credit from somebody. And what bucket don't they look at to say we can't use this to pay debts to operate with in the event of problems?
Okay, well, I think rating agencies defer in that to some degree, but in general terms, I don't think you're going to be looking at legal restrictions. That's not going to be available for you in case of hardships. For instance, a legal restriction may be a grant that was prepaid that you can only spend on those activities.
Fine. So
Or
I'm asking,
maybe
how much is
forfeitures.
that of the total here we have, how much, what's the total we have? What is of the total, what do we have today, total, Andrea? Approximately, not to the last dollar. How many millions of dollars total we have in the various buckets, for lack of a better word?
18 million.
It's 18 million. So my question then is, of the 18 million, how much is legally restricted that we couldn't use except for the intended use that was put into that bucket?
Well, I would think almost all of it would be available.
Okay,
Maybe with the exception of about $1 million.
Okay, fine. So basically, today, we're going to have $16-17 million available. Now, the other thing, usually, in my experience with credit agencies, they're looking at our ability to raise money going forward. And we have basically, from a statutory point, there's a 10 mills, we're 3. Not that we're ever going to do it, but we basically could raise 7 more mills of taxes, correct?
Yes, you have the capacity,
Yeah,
capacity left.
So these are the kind of things that bonding agencies are usually looking at, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Laredo?
It's a short answer. Did you say that this transfer to the pension fund would, you said it will affect our bond rating, but you meant adversely affect, is it not?
Well, I didn't say it either way. I said.
Okay, well, I'm asking you then.
I would think it's a negative. How big of a negative it is in context of your overall reserves and your ability to raise money.
I understand, but just because I'm not it adversely affects it, whether you said it or not, it's not going to increase our bond rating. Improve our credit rating.
It would not increase your bond rating.
I have in light of Councilman Moss thing, and this is such an important issue, I don't even know what the opinion of the pension fund is, if they have weighed in on this officially. I think that the prudent thing to do is to defer this thing. This is a lot more important than the other 2 items that we deferred until we have the budget to go through, and this could have an impact, which I'm not sure what it is, even after this dialogue. And it could be significant as we move into capital improvements and other things that we may agree. So
Councilmember Petros?
Okay, first of all, I would like to say that I was very happy to see that the report that came out from the actuarial showed that we were in a better position than we thought when we made our changes to the pension. And our unfunded liability, we were concerned that it would be close to 80%, and we're at 89.4%, I think. I spoke to our intent was to not dip below 90%, and we felt that that was important for the viability of the pension fund. My understanding is if we were to put this full amount in, it would raise our percentage to about 4% higher than what it is. It would be just under 94%. And since there is some concerns on either side of this, and I want to be true to a component of what we talked about, which is getting over 90%, I think that we could secure a certain percentage of this towards that to get over 90% to satisfy our concerns about the pension. And then the other amount of money, we could make a decision how we wanted to deal with that.
Councilmember Segurola?
I guess I have 2 questions now after listening to Councilmember Petros. Chris, sorry if I can ask you to stand up again.
Right.
You gave us the pension workshop not long ago. I guess 2 questions to you are, number 1, how much money out of the $1,900,000 and whatever would we need to put in to get to the 90%? And number 2, generally, philosophically speaking, I guess, now that we have the actuarial report and all the numbers, what are the advantages and disadvantages, if you could repeat that again, to funding or overfunding or underfunding this pension fund?
Okay, so the first part, I would not be able to tell you tonight or actually even tomorrow. We'd have to rely upon the actuary to tell us how much that would be. So to get it to 90% instead of the 93 or 94%, they'd be able to do that in short order. Obviously, it would be something less than the 1.9 that you're dealing with tonight. Regarding the rest of your question, us as finance officials, most of us, the funding status of a plan or the underfunded status of the plan is not as important as if you're making the actuarially required contributions every year. It's less of a concern to me that a plan is 80% funded or 70% funded. That manifests itself in higher costs to the employer generally over time. How much you pay every year into a pension plan is just a question of timing. At the end of the day, you will pay what you have to pay into the pension plan. So if you're 70% funded, it's going to be generally reflecting a higher contribution than if it were 90% funded. The reality is, if you were worried about a funding status of a defined benefit plan, you may never ever set one up if you weren't allowed to amortize the accrued liability over time of starting one up. So 90% funded is very good. 85% funded is very good. 80% funded is not bad. I mean, obviously, the closer you get to 100, and then when you go over 100%, I actually view that as a risk, because what tends to happen excuse me, in public pension plans is you become overfunded, which means you don't have any employer contributions going into the plan typically. And during union negotiations or just any type of negotiations with employees, it's very common to hear the refrain that, hey, you can provide us additional benefits and you can use the excess assets of the plan and it won't cost you anything extra. The problem with that is the long-term view of it is you've promised additional benefits that you will not be able to extricate yourself from very easily. So you're stuck with a very big liability. And if the market changes or you have other adverse actuarial impacts to your plan, you're going to wind up contributing, and then you're going to wind up contributing on a higher plan benefits. So being over 100% funded may sound good, but my experience with that is it actually can be a risk.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor?
Few things. One, to Katie's point, we were trying to get to 90. We also, though, recognized the fact that we were not comfortable with the assumption rate that the actuary was using. So the 89 is the way that we felt at the time that we voted on this 7-0 wasn't accurate, right? It was somewhere south. It would be somewhere south of 89 if we were using an assumption rate that we were more comfortable with.
Except it's going down every year a half point. So we're
yes, except
leading that
right
in over
now
time.
the snapshot is inaccurate, or we were saying we weren't comfortable with.
I mean,
it's going down.
No,
it hasn't
we
gone
weren't
down.
comfortable, but our investment return was greater than our assumption rate last year, which is why we have a net
That's
positive.
great, and I truly, no one hopes more than me that trend continues. Not sure it will, but so that's the one side to the 90%. That perhaps actually the number is a little higher or not, whatever motion you want to make. The other thing I just want to add, Councilmember Laredo, last meeting you mentioned, and it stuck with me because I wholeheartedly agreed with you. You were talking about the community center expansion and what happens when we make decisions and then there's nothing, right? So that is a perfect example of what's happening here. A decision was made last October. In the previous administration, perhaps incorrectly, but the way we would operate it, the money would have been switched. Our new manager is much more diligent. She looked at the original ordinance. She said there's a procedural step that has to be taken. Wait a year, and then we get to all rehash it, open it up again. I heard in my meeting before the last budget on Tuesday, or it wasn't Tuesday, on the phone, at some point I heard, I think maybe it was Wednesday, I think you're going to be okay, it's going to pass. You heard, don't bother preparing for it, it's going to be pulled off the agenda. I feel like we've been waited out. So do what you guys want. If Katie wants to amend it, if you guys want to vote it down, I just think you should be prepared for the fact that anything that's decided up here can just be reworked by waiting it out.
Councilmember London?
I don't think I agree with Chris completely. I don't think there's any magic on 90 or 89 or 85 or 80. There's also two methods of taking care of unfunded UAAL, liabilities that basically you don't have enough money to pay the benefits you've agreed or promised to pay. And one of them is a level plan where you say, fine, over 20 years, I'm going to take $500,000 a year to make up for the deficit I have. The other one is a percentage of payroll. So obviously, as your payroll goes up, that number goes up. So you have a normal cost, which would be what, in simple terms, what it would take to make sure you have enough money today to pay the benefits you promised. But then you have this amortization of the money you promised you didn't have the money to pay when you made the thing. When you made your last contract with the firemen and police, you committed about another $3.5 or more $4 million that you didn't have. So therefore, we increased our amortization to do that effect. To go ahead now and take $1.5 million, $2 million, or $1 and reduce it serves no purpose whatsoever in my mind. It's no benefit to the village. It's no benefit to anything. It's not doesn't affect the employees because they're going to get the same benefit whether we do it today or not. So to me, I'm 100% against it.
I just want to ask, Councilmember Moss, is your concern that this money, taking this money away would reduce us below the 30%? Is that your concern? Okay, he's just spoken to that, just so you know, and he doesn't believe that's a factor. Second of all, I want to speak to the Vice Mayor's point. That's my point. We had a council that adopted this 7-0. This wasn't a controversial moment. This was a moment where you all got together, and watching that last council, we remember that was few and far between when you were 7-0. We were 7-0 on this item. And you all said you wanted this money to go into the unfunded liability. And I think we're setting a bad precedent because it says, well, this council can do what it will, but if things get maneuvered, our call, our decisions that we've weighed in on, Ed, it's not to your point. This was supposed to be, this was 7-0. It would have been moved in, but for a procedural issue. And now we're waiting a year, and now we're coming back. I understand your point, and if it comes to us, that's kind of the point. We weigh in on those, and I think
so. We reverse that instead of let them do it, and then say, "Hey, this was really a dumb move, and we should."
But no. My point is, and Councilmember Dorito can go next. But my feeling is, we should honor the wishes of a 7-0 vote by the prior council on something they said they were going to do, they committed to do, and they were doing. I think that's where I am. Procedurally, I think that's the right move for us, and I think that's the way we should be operating on this. We should honor what's come before. One of the greatest things about this council, one of the greatest things about this village, we work. The council works, and we've got historic knowledge, and people do things for the right reasons. And here we are. They did what they felt was right, but because of a technicality, their will was not carried out. It's not that there was a step that was found that should be done. Fine, but I think it's on us to fulfill what they wanted. Councilmember Laredo?
Yeah, thank you. Both in the campaign and anything that I disagree with in the past, I don't blame the previous council because they had enough and difficult times. But it would be absolutely unacceptable for any normal practice, either in business or in public life, to simply not review things as significant as 1.95 because circumstances can change. It does not mean that we don't trust the previous council. It does not mean that we have to follow a tradition of spending money. I'm trying to struggle with the right decision, but that would be the argument that I wouldn't accept, because then what's the point of me being here and being elected and 4 of us are new? So the issue that we're creating on the previous council, it's not a healthy part of this discussion. I continue to think that I would like to hear from the pension board. I now heard, and my second question was, I'd like to hear from the expert in our group on this area who was on the pension board, and he's spoken against it. And I'm prepared to vote against it because I don't, from what I know, or the Pharaoh, if you want, but even your suggestion, which has some attractiveness, would have to wait for a calculation to arrive between 85 and 90%. $1.9 million to me, no matter how you Mickey Mouse it around and where do you put it on the books, is still $1.95 million of our taxpayers' money, and I want to take my time about it. And or we can call the question and vote.
Okay, Councilmember Sagarola, then Councilmember Petros, and then I guess Councilmember London will follow up, and then we'll call the question.
Just an opinion? Mr. Mayor, with all respect to you and the Vice Mayor, I disagree with the precedent that's being set. I understand that the previous council a year ago made the decision, made it on 7-0, and they made the best decision that they could with the information they had. But if for whatever reason, the implementation of that got delayed, and now we, the next council, have better information and can make a better decision, I have no problem with that precedent. If we make a decision and the next council, for some reason, is delayed, and the next council has better information, and they can make a better decision for the village, I have absolutely no problem with that. And I understand what the previous council did, but we were missing the actuarial report. Now we have more information. Our position is not as bad as it was thought to be, and we have the opportunity to review what the previous council did and make a better decision on behalf of the village. It's very simple for me.
Okay, Councilmember Petros.
I would like to clarify a couple of things. First of all, this money is not money that we got from taxes. It's money that was collected when somebody ended up needing some emergency services, and that was put in place for that purpose. My understanding is it isn't restricted money. I have asked a few people why it actually wasn't included on an annual basis, and I don't know the answer to that. What I would like to say is if we know that the 1.9 would get us about 4% higher, we also know half of that would get us about 2% higher. To your point, Councilmember London, about what this would do for the village, it's basically like a prepayment on a mortgage. So it would, in fact, reduce on a small amount, though it wouldn't reduce the yearly amount that the village has to pay because the plan is better funded. So there is less liability going forward, and that is a benefit. I don't think, Councilmember Laredo, that we're going to get any strong opinion one way or another from the pension board on whether this is a good practice or not. It's strictly about decreasing the unfunded liability, slightly reducing. The prediction was if we put this money in, that it would reduce the annual contribution of the village about $100,000 up until the next however many years. And on the police side, 75. So 175,000 every year would be required. We would not be required to put that much money in if we put the $2 million
in ad valorem revenue.
No,
right?
it's not taxes.
It's not.
No. In the years to come, we're concerned about a decrease in ad valorem revenue, which we use to pay the pension annual contribution.
So I hear both sides of this. I do agree that we should be making the best decisions with the information we have. I mean, we've had a park out front here that we have flip-flopped on through many councils. So I don't think this is the first time that we've been in a situation where we have reevaluated a decision that's made by a previous council. However, I personally would like to consider putting half of this money in there and voting on that. If, Allison, you would accept that amendment. If you don't, that's fine as well.
Absolutely, because as to your point, the numbers came back better than we expected. My real concern here, more even than the money, I do think it's important to honor previous council's commitments, but to Councilmember Segarola's point, you have new information, things have different, maybe something good came out of this, but I think it's an important thing to notice how this happened and why this happened and how we're in this situation.
Councilmember London, do you want to say anything else before we vote?
Yeah, me, yes. Mike, in most cases, I agree with what you said as far as decision goes. I also agree with Ignacio as far as better information. I disagree with Katie and Allison as far as taking half money because it serves no purpose whatsoever. All it does is long-term really hurt us rather than help us, since we are probably going to be borrowing money and doing capital things going forward. There's no reason to do that, because when we talk about the unfunded liabilities, we usually also say, we're going to do this over 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. That usually determines what amount we're going to put away every year to take care of these unfunded liabilities. So obviously, as long as it's a reasonable number within the guidelines of state statutes, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, you can do this. So this does not help us, it doesn't help us one bit. I have no idea. I mean, because all you're taking when you say this was from money for fire transport, that's not like ad valorem. Well, you know what? So is the memberships in the community center from a different thing, and so is from all the items we collect for revenue. So it doesn't matter where the revenue comes from, it's revenue that we can use as a village to provide the best quality services we can to our residents. So again, I respect you guys did this. I also respect the fact that we got better information now. I also have a complete, and again, I wasn't on the council at the time, I was chairman of the pension board, I would have definitely been against it. So I'm still against it today.
Councilmember Moss, but then we're going to cut it off and go to a vote.
Okay. Again, I'm still worried about the issues of the bond rating, the cash. I know You have a side on that, and I need more time for that part and figure that out. So I'm not ready even for half of the money right now. I'm not ready to pass this right now. So if it does go to question, my vote will be no. But if you want to defer it, that's fine. Until I can clarify that.
How much time do you need?
The October meeting?
I would make a formal motion that we defer to the 15th of October with a
Could we do the second meeting in October?
Oh, whichever you like. With the caveat that we have not made a final decision, but the numbers and the proposal would be, the floor would be 50% of the 1.9. So that we can.
Say that again.
In other words, when it comes back again, we will be discussing approximately $1 million, not $2 million. So it's combining her.
Listen, they passed it for $2 million approximately.
I don't know who they
Well,
are.
last council, so I don't
I
think.
understand.
So therefore, it should be whether it's 1 million, 2 million, 50,000 or nothing. It's going to come back up, then you decide again.
Oh, but I'm taking under consideration Ms. Petros' suggestion that, and trying to eliminate easy things, that we discuss it next time at about 50% of that, and could be rejected outright. I may vote for it outright nevertheless.
So you got rid of half of it today.
Well, but you know, I believe in incremental school progress.
Okay.
Yes, if we get
Councilmember
50%
Moss?
out of the way, that much better. Learn that from Kissinger.
And one other
Not Mr.
thing,
Kissinger here,
since we're ending this, just one other thing to think about, a possibility is to, if we decide to use this money, that maybe we pay it over a longer period of time, so it slowly is taken down and not 2 million over at one time. So just something to think about.
Let's be clear, what's,
About all of those options?
I just want to bring something up.
Please.
Remember, this is a budget amendment to this year's budget, okay?
So we can't do it
So-
after the new one passes?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I just was speaking to the manager about. So I think you'd have to just move it into, at the next meeting, we're going to have, move it into the budget in a place, and you'll vote at another time on.
can we put it into transport fees for?
I think that the staff should consider it. I just want to make sure that clearly, though, that if you push it past October 1st, this item's just not, it's not teed up anymore, because this is a budget amendment.
You have to redo an ordinance?
Chris, I mean,
Okay.
Well, I think that's right. I think if you don't pass it, you'll need to roll it over into the FY20 budget. You either do that with this next meeting, or you come back and amend the budget you just passed. So that seems this is foreseeable. I would say, as Chad suggested, you put it into next year's budget if you don't pass it tonight.
Mike, can I say something?
Certainly.
I would, if we're deferring this, I think we need to be very clear what information we want that's going to come back that people would need in order to make a decision, as opposed to just not making a decision tonight.
That's right. Brett, what information do you want? And Councilmember Loretto, I know you wanted to defer based on some information you wanted. So what do we? Councilmember Moss first, and then Councilmember
No,
Loretto.
at the beginning of this thing, I thought that the vacuum of information, $1.95 million, is a lot of money for me and the people we all represent. And it would be prudent to right now I would vote against it. If you want to take a vote, then it would kill it. But I thought in fairness, and
What information would you like?
first of all, the information on the adverse impact on our bond rating. I already got the answer that the pension fund has not waited on, but the chairman, sitting to my left up to now, ex-chairman, said that they would be against it. So I'm not suggesting I would vote for even 50%, but it would seem to me that we could defer it or vote it up and down. I defer, and I would definitely hope to make it easier that we talked about the 50% of the 1.9 million.
Ed, you get 2 seconds, and then we're moving on.
As chairman of the pension board, I'd be all for it, because it's much easier for us. Obviously, sitting on the council, we're totally against it.
Correct.
Okay, so what information do you need?
I want to know how much cash we have and how that will affect our bond rating. And then how this will adversely impact it, if it will or not.
I would hope at the second budget hearing, tonight, we're going to know how much we
We
have.
should know that.
And you wanted to know how to get to 90%, what that amount is.
Over 90, yes. We would be in excess of 90%.
That's what we need. We got a few hours if you want to do it.
So to get to the 90%, that would require our actuary to run the numbers because they have to look at all the different assumptions. That would take probably a few weeks for them to do, but we could do that. To answer the question regarding what contribution would take us to the 90%, and with regard to Councilmember Moss's question, the village has a contracted financial analyst who is here. If you want to speak to the credit rating implications, perhaps that question can be answered.
Yeah, and one other thing, right now, that money can't be used for anything else. It's sitting in there. Do we need to give you direction not to touch that 1.95 million right now until we decide what we're going to do with it?
So right now, in fiscal 19 budget, it's still in fund balance. We're not touching it. In fiscal 20's budget, we have assumed that it passes, so we have factored that in to next year's budget since it passed on first reading.
All right, so you
That's
won't.
if it doesn't pass.
So if it doesn't pass, we would basically reduce the retirement contribution by about 175,000. I think it's 100 approximately in fire and 75 in police.
You
So
would
we need to
increase it.
We would need to make up that difference. So right now, that money, we assume we made the transfer, which means we have less of an obligation in 20. So we would back that out.
You have about $295,000 in prepaid, which I pointed out to you today. Did you check that out?
Yes, we did talk about that. So,
And wouldn't that more than offset that, what you have now?
so my understanding is that it actually was already netted out in the second year that we actually caught up. The footnote sort of references that was netted out already, so that's not available money.
You're telling me that when you look at the valuation report, the 290-some thousand is we have a credit for, don't we, at this point in time, overpayment?
My understanding is that we already assumed the credit when the payment was made in the following year. So it says, the footnote reads.
Okay, if you did that, fine.
Yeah.
It didn't appear to me that you did, but if you did that, that's fine.
Right.
In other words, what happened was, for everybody who's here, we didn't get the state funds one year, the 175, 185, because the administrator couldn't get the reports done. So got them late, so one year we got double. So that's how we got this extra credit. And looking at the evaluation report, it appeared to me that, again, I didn't go through all the financials at the back of the thing, that we had that credit going forward.
Right, so maybe reduced by any portion of the prepaid contribution, $295,306 that exists as of October 1, 2018.
So we used it since then?
It had, when we finally got the payment, the actuary.
I'm saying we used it
calculated-
since then.
Right.
Okay.
We have a motion on the floor.
Yeah.
What's the motion? Well, to defer, okay, let's.
I wanted to understand.
I think if you defer it, you can hear it later. We'll bring back another item for you to address it with. That's what we'll do.
Later one tonight.
Tonight.
Well, no, later
Tonight, we
tonight,
gotta
you're
move
gonna
into
have to
the
move it into the.
transport fees.
Into the budget, the 2 million, because the manager had assumed that it passed and it's not
Well,
in.
this is why I wanted to make clear, because we sometimes get caught up in our own, and I've spoken to you to stop us when we're making mistakes. Sometimes one votes for an ordinance on first reading for the sole purpose of having further discussion and facts. In fact, even after you speak against the subject, you vote for that ordinance so that we have a gap of time to catch up. That gap has happened. We've been trapped with all the problems we have with the budget. But the bottom line is that today I don't have the information I need to make a decision. The only way I think is rationally to move it into this budget is I would prepare to do $1 million. You know, it's roughly one half of what for the purposes of just keeping it in the funds. And I think I heard you right. And sometimes I understand that we can move these funds as this council desires. Am I correct in interpreting that? So the other
That's true. Why do we have this in front of us at all? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's a very good question.
I mean,
But I'm trying to move
It's two
it.
different statements. We were told they couldn't just move it. We had to go through this.
He just said that we
So we wait a year
could
to
move
get it, and now Katie said it's not restricted. You're saying it's not restricted.
I didn't say, ma'am. He
No,
said.
no, I didn't mean, I'm saying you
He said that
repeated
we
what
can
he
move
said.
the money.
I'm sorry, I'm frustrated, but not with you.
Yes, well, let's just be clear. You can move the money, but there is a
Bill, I laugh.
process to move that money. That's what brought you here to begin with. You will have to amend the budget one way or the other to account for this additional contribution, whatever that amount ultimately will be. You need to appropriate that money. It has not been appropriated. An appropriation is a use of funds for a particular purpose. This money before you amends the current year's budget to put additional money into retirement contributions. As you had, as a council, the previous council had asked before. So if you defer this, that's fine. as the attorney says, if you're going to have to deal with it eventually in a budget somehow, some way, whether that's tonight at the next second meeting or at some future meeting where you amend the budget.
Well, we're going to have to come up with $175,000 in contributions, correct?
That's more than likely. I think one of the issues is we had to move with the understanding with council's direction that the money would be appropriated and we could actually deposit it by the end of the fiscal year, which is important for evaluation purposes. We could then go back and ask the actuary. In fact, we've already asked the actuary what the impact of that would be to the pension contribution for the next year. And that's the issue that was just addressed, and that's the one you're talking about. So we would have to come up with, if it's not passed and the money's not put in, it's not going to be counted towards the valuation more than likely at 10/1/2019. It'll be counted for a future year.
Okay, I have an idea. You can defer it, okay? You can defer it. We will bring it back then at first reading, amending the new budget, okay? The staff will include the 1.9 whatever into the budget, wherever you need to do, and we'll go to first reading on the second meeting in October, and we'll have a second reading after that, basically amending the new budget with that money. So you can still defer it.
We still have to come up with $175,000.
Yes, but that's what you have in the next meeting, and I think that the staff will, work on that.
Listen, I would defer to you on what you would like to do.
Honestly, my hands are kind of thrown up at this point. I mean, I think we should defer. Nobody should take a vote on something they're not comfortable with. Whatever hoops need to be jumped through to make it work in the budget, then we do that.
I mean, I don't think we're going to get much more information than we already have. Personally.
Brett has specific questions that he wants, right? You don't feel comfortable voting?
I think we have 18 million. Isn't that the right answer?
Yeah, and like I said,
And we
Ms.
need
Abedin
9.
is here now, so
She
if
can
you,
speak to that.
right, would that help,
Yes.
Ms. Abedin?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Lourdes Abedin, Estrada Hinojosa, your financial advisor. How can I help?
Councilmember Moss, you have a question?
Yes, my question, back to the first question. How much money do we have in the general funds under reserves in cash, and how much do we need in order to maintain our AAA bond rating?
And would putting the 1.995 into the unfunded liabilities impact that?
Yes.
So I am not sure, how much we have right now is the CFO's answer. How much we need to keep the AAA rating is 30% of your general fund expenditures.
Which comes out to
35, what's 30%?
Under 10 million.
30% of 35.
Yes, you have about 35 million or so in
So
expenditures.
30% would be 10.5
Exactly, about $11 million. This money that you're talking about is held in the general fund reserves, so that would be reducing whatever balance we have at this point. Do you want to chime in as to what the balance-
Reducing what, ma'am? The 11 million?
What do we have in the general fund balance now?
About 9.7 million.
I heard 18. Where's the
Across all funds, so general fund, 9.7.
General fund is what
Is the general
rating
fund the only
agencies-
one?
General fund is what the rating agencies look at as a given.
So-
They will review other funds that we have. However, they're not a given. So because the land trust fund that we moved out has language in it that says that upon unanimous approval of the council, it could be used for other purposes, they may or may not consider it, but it's not a given.
Was that considered prior to it being moved out of the general fund?
I'm not sure whether they considered it or not, but I was not consulted on the matter.
Okay, sir.
Lourdes, there's, I think, $4 million, the emergency fund. Is that part of the general fund, or is that
Yes.
restricted? The 9 million, does that include the 4 million? Or is it 13 million?
I think,
No, it's included in the 9.
It's in the 9, okay.
yes.
What is the going rate on a AAA today? Say 20-year, 30-year? municipal?
About 2.5%.
Okay, and what is the double A?
I did the analysis, but I haven't done it recently, but it was.
Tenth of a percent in
It was
today's
about
market?
100, it was,
100 basis
I
points?
did the analysis based on what it would cost, for example, the stormwater utility fund, which
Mm-hmm.
is the loan that you are currently, and it was going to be about $150,000 difference between
Over how many years?
30.
Thank you.
150.
No, 150 annually.
Well, how much money?
I'm
How
sorry.
much, you were
I
going to
don't-
borrow it, you had
I don't
150,000.
have, I don't have the numbers in front of
So
me.
$150,000 in general. What is the difference in the rate between a triple and a double?
If you give me a few minutes, I can. we
Okay,
can
thank
bring
you.
Back up the subject, but right now I haven't updated those numbers in over a couple
I'm
months.
just talking about the market today. I'm not asking you about our numbers. The market today, how many basis points difference between a triple and a double A?
I would say 25 to 30 basis points.
Let me, we gotten a lot of information that, just like Ms. Petros doesn't understand, I don't either. The general revenue, the money that you say, that the 10% is about 11 million right now?
The 10%.
Or not, I mean, we have 9 million.
The reserve,
The reserve is
fund
9 million,
balance.
which is below the 10% that they require.
The 30%,
The 30%, I'm sorry.
yes.
If we move this money out, almost $2 million, would that decrease that 9 to 7?
Yes.
Are we thinking of borrowing about $60 million for the stormwater fund?
Sorry.
What was the question again?
2.25% is about $60 million to get 150,000. So is that what the number we're looking at when we're talking about?
The
About 60 million?
stormwater was about 18 million.
18 million, not 60, right?
For the first 3 years of the program was 18 only.
Yes.
So I don't know how you possibly get $150,000 at 25 basis points. It doesn't add up.
Whatever number she was provided, that's where she got that.
Exactly. When
just
I
saying,
did
it
the
doesn't add up.
analysis, I don't remember the differential in between the AAA and the AA interest rates at the point, but it was about $150,000 a year.
Okay.
Difference between a AAA rating and a AA rating.
On 18 million.
Yes.
To Mr. Moss's question, I'm sorry. No,
Does the 9 million already assume that you took the almost 600,000, the 580, 161 from working capital to balance this budget?
In the proposed 20 budget, we assume that the transfer is made.
Of this money that, and this I think went from the first budget to the second, that to keep the millage rate down, it seems like you took almost $600,000 from working capital, right? 580, 161?
Right, but the
So the 9 million, does that, that money's already taken out when you give that number of 9 million? Or if it were there, it's 9,580,161?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go on record as being that specific, but it's before,
The 9 million's before.
yes.
So let me see if Mr. Moss's question is triggered. We need a 30% to keep our ratings, well, we are currently below 30%, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
And further, if we take $2 million out, we go down $2 million below 30%.
So the next
So the net
step,
effect is, I think, I mean, severely adverse. That's a big drop. We're already $2 million under from 11 to 9, and we're adding another 2, so that's $4 million under. How could you possibly suggest that we do this?
I think the next step for the AA is 15% versus 30.
Well, I don't know about the next step.
maintain
I'm talking
your
about today, that we have to decide this today. Did my scenario make sense to you or didn't get it? We're below the 30% by $2 million, and we're being told to reduce that by $2 million more. It brings us about to 7 as versus 11. So I don't know all this financial
It would
double
definitely
speak,
affect
but
your
it
AAA
seems to me
rating.
not a prudent thing to do financially for the financial health of this community. I just, unless I'm missing something, but I'm just having a hard time correlating all the information we're getting from professionals.
Councilmember Petros?
Lourdes, a couple times when we've spoken about this, it sounds like when they look to do a rating, it's a little bit of an art form. And you alluded to the fact that they may take into account these additional pots of money that we have, or they may not. And we aren't going to know until they go and do the rating. Now, how often do they look at our rating and determine whether we're double or triple?
Usually, they do a credit review every 2 years. Since we do not have an open market securities on our books, they have not reviewed our ratings since, I think, 2015. We've had these discussions. As far as the CAFR, which is what they reference, our 2018 CAFR still reflects that we are within that 30%. However, currently, our budget is not, and they will review that as well.
So if I hear you correctly, regardless of what we do with this money, we're at risk of going down because we're, as he said, we're already below the 30%.
Not if you stay at the 11 million.
We're not at 11, we're
Which
at
is
9.
9 less this other $500,000 that'll disappear when we approve this budget tonight.
Unless they take into consideration the land trust monies. If they
Which
take into
we've always used before. Last year, we decided, we had a big debate, Katie, I think you'll remember this. We had a big debate about where to set the millage and what to do in the final budget approval. And I remember like it was yesterday, you were standing there looking much like you do tonight and said how much money we had in reserves. And it was a really, really big number. It wasn't this, oh, it's only this pot, it's only this pot. And as a result, we made a decision, a policy decision, to keep the millage rate lower and draw down our reserves. So my question is, what's changed in the way that they look at us from last year to this?
Well, we transferred like $7 million from the general fund to the land trust fund. And that was a big move. And I'm not saying that they wouldn't consider it, but it's not a given. So normally, if it's in the general fund, they just assume it counts.
So could we put that back in the general fund?
We moved it all last year. It hasn't been slowly building up.
This is part of our like
Restricted?
5-year look back that we've done for a year.
So I think there were two factors. There was one when we did the 2018 year-end amendment, when we reviewed the ordinance that established the fire transport fees. The interpretation that we had was that it required its own fund. I think to Lourdes's point about what the 30% reserve, I think it is a reasonable expectation that the general fund balance as well as the Parks and Open Space Fund, as they were previously counted towards our available reserves, would still be counted. Notwithstanding the other factor, if you recall, we had a $15 million working capital available capital in our general fund, in our working capital surplus. And for the prior 2 years, we hadn't been making the transfers into the CIP. So that also affected what we were looking at, because there were projects that had been delivered that were authorized by council that reduced that working capital amount. So I think both of those factors played in.
And I'd just like to be clear, your ordinance that created your PROS fund, Park, Recreation, and Open Space, requires this to be set aside separately. It's also more transparent, so you can see the revenues and expenditures in the fund, which you would not see if it were in the general fund. And the last point I'd like to make about that is the use of those funds is determined by the ordinance itself and how you can spend it and where the money comes from, not where you classify it in the financial statements. There were no additional encumbrances placed on that money other than what the ordinance places on that money.
Wouldn't it have been better had we looked at, to Ms. Abedin's point just recently, nobody consulted her before this money was moved. So shouldn't we have done that and then potentially determined that maybe we change the ordinance?
Well, you could change the ordinance, and I think that's why this money, if I were looking at it as a rating agency, I would say you could change what that money's used for in 2 readings of an ordinance and put it back and make it just all
So you
general
don't
fund money.
think that we should have consulted the bond rating?
I don't think it makes any difference in the bond rating. It shouldn't, because they should be looking back towards the ordinance and the restrictions on that money. If you had looked at this money in the general fund, it had a commitment, which is a lesser designation than a restriction. So it didn't really change how these funds can be used. The ordinance requires this money to set aside 1% of your millage rate as a revenue stream. That money's transferred from the general fund to the open space fund as you receive it. Grant money may go into it, but the expenditures come out of it as well. So if you're looking at a financial statement and you see restrictions, those are generally external legal restrictions of funds that you cannot spend. They may be grants, they may be forfeiture funds, there could be all sorts of external legal restrictions on money. Your next level is a classification called commitments, and those are local laws generally that you would pass, either resolutions or ordinances that restrict how that money can be used. But because they're things under your control, they're also viewed as things that you can undo. So that money would generally be viewed as being available. In the ordinance itself, it contemplates emergencies that you could reach out and use that open space money, which is generally set aside for infrequent purchases of land, and use that in emergencies, but have a plan to pay it back in short order.
Had the money been considered in our general fund at any point during the rating procedure prior to that, do you know?
Was.
It was. So the monies were in the general, under the same ordinance, they were considered our general fund, correct? So if that's the case, shouldn't we have consulted with our bond people before making this move? That's my point at this point.
I don't think so. Like I said, the ordinance itself creates the requirement that it be set aside in a
But
separate
it was
fund.
considered general fund, sir.
Okay, but right now we have it in a certain spot.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay?
It just,
So let's talk about what we have. And can I ask, Chris, can I ask you one question?
Sure.
When we talk about the 9 million, was that assuming that we were taking the 2 million and moving it into the pension?
That's as
So
it exists
does
today.
it go from 9 to 7 or 11 to 9? That, I need to know that.
Goes to 9 to 7, but you also need to keep in mind, if you're talking about the ratings, that that's $7.7 million in the PROS fund should be counted towards the amount available for emergencies.
You know,
Okay.
excuse me,
I
we got the money from
want to be,
Oceana.
I
I'm
want to
sorry.
be,
So that puts
May
us
I?
at 14?
Yeah, I mean, if you compared it to the way, according to Ms. Aberdeen, the way you
would
would
be
have done it
16.
before, yeah, it would be much,
what
it would be
mine
the
is.
$7.7 million higher.
So you're suggesting, or you're proposing that even though this money is literally housed in a separate account, it's still, when we submit for bond rating, because with a 7-0 vote in case of a dire emergency, we could access that money, it should count towards our total fund balance.
Nothing has changed regarding those funds, other than it's just separately, shown on a financial statement. What governs those funds is the ordinance itself.
So the actual number, when considering our bond rating, before moving the money that we need for this, before moving fire transport fees, is what? Inclusive of all, regardless of which little bucket it sits in.
So it's going to be around 16 million. It's going to be the 9 plus the 7.
Okay.
To be clear, it's not an emergency. The code says any other purpose upon the unanimous approval of the council that you can move.
So it's even less restricted. I mean,
Yes.
I think that the feeling of our community is
May
that we
I-
would never use that money
I
for
have
anything
a
else.
question,
but-
sec. Before it became restricted funds and it was committed funds, was there a 7-0 vote requirement or was it less?
They were never restricted funds. They have always been committed funds because they were created by a local law that can be undone locally. They were never legally restricted, which is generally an external restriction.
Well, hold on, just to be clear, there is money in there that is restricted that was given to the village per certain covenants.
do you all realize that you are, I'm going to try to be, Bill, focused, that we're getting from professionals all kinds of information that is all over the place? Or am I, you just said a little while ago in the other answer that you did not believe it affected our bond rating. I just want to, a very simple question. We're at 9, which is 2 million under the 11, and if we do this, we'll beat that 7. Is that a correct statement or not?
Yes.
Which puts us significantly below the bond rating criteria of 30%.
If you did not count the PROS money, that
No,
would be,
well, just listen to my question.
all right?
Because you're assuming another step that we're not discussing today. If we do this today, it would decrease that 9 to 7, which means that we're now $4 million below the minimum 30% for a good rating. Would that be a correct statement?
Well, no, I don't think it is. And the fact that it ignores the $7.7 million that you've previously been counting towards your rainy day or emergency type situation. So, I mean, just because we've moved this over as a result of a rereading of your ordinance doesn't change anything about how that money got restricted to begin with. It's just how you show it, period. If the bond rating agencies had been including that money before, they should have been looking at the underlying commitment requirements of those monies. Nothing has changed. So I think if you go back to a rating agency and make a case for it, you can say, look, this money's available if we need it. Granted, it requires a 7-0 vote, but at the end of the day, all it requires is 4 votes to undo that ordinance that created it, not 7. You could just, by 4 votes, get rid of it. So, I mean, that's the reality of it.
So the answer then, I'm going to quote you and say, don't confuse me with the facts.
Yeah.
The question is,
facts are all over the
if I
place.
can try to phrase this as simply as possible, and I'm sorry, Ed, I know I just took your time. But, oh, here, you can have your gavel back. When going for our bond rating, the total reserves, regardless of where they are, that we demonstrate, what is that number?
So it's in the package that was handed out
Seconds ago?
and emailed previously. There is an exhibit in there that says budget summary, Village of Key Biscayne, fiscal year 1920, with the general fund millage set at 3195. So, and I can kind of walk around and show you if that helps. But basically, the precise number that I'm talking about is the fund balance net position for the general fund, which is 9.771 million, and the parks and open space, which is 7.459. That's where I came up with.
So the answer to Councilmember Laredo's question
Mm-hmm.
is 16.
I think,
I had
I think where we're getting tripped up here a little, if I may add something, which is we have separated this money. We've put it in a different account. Until we go to these bond rating agencies, we're not really going to know how they're going to treat it. They shouldn't change their mind, but I think what Lourdes has been telling us is she can't guarantee that. So as we sit up here trying to have a hard, fast number, we're not going to get it because the last time they looked at us was 2015. And we're just going to have to take this information that we have right now and either make a decision or defer to make a decision at the next meeting.
That's right. My one question is, the money we received, I think was Moshiana, was that legally restricted to use to buy land?
Yes, that's why I
So
said,
that is not in the 16 or the $18 million. How much was that? How many millions was
But
that?
it was
Oh, hold on, how much was?
I think it was $7 million.
$7.2 million.
So that money cannot be used to pay
what I'm
general
saying.
obligations or bonds. So you must have tracked that 7 million from the number, unless I'm wrong, Chris. If there's a legal thing,
This is the first I'm hearing about that.
well, you weren't here.
Well, it's also not on the financial statements that way as a restriction, because it should be if that were the case for it.
Well, they made a mistake. What can I tell you?
Well, it's an important,
Well,
I don't
It's an
think it was
important
actually
oversight.
restricted, even though it should have been.
Well-
But fortunately, we didn't spend it.
but no, the point being, it is
It
restricted.
can't be
legally,
added,
right?
is what he's saying.
Excuse me, it's legally restricted. So you really have 9 million or whatever the number comes out to,
Okay.
not 16 million. So by doing this, it just doesn't help you at all. That's like,
What was considered, right, in our last seeking of a bond rating, am I correct that it was considered as part of our general funds?
that would not
It
be.
has always been restricted. However, the legal language says that
We can
if
move
there's a unanimous vote of the commission, it could be used for other purposes.
Excuse me, is that correct?
Yes.
I don't think it is.
I think we're confusing concepts here.
What's
You're
that?
right. The ordinance says that, but there was
Doesn't
money that was given to the village with a restriction on how it can be used.
Period.
Oh,
And
the Oceana
that's-
money.
No,
Yes.
that's what I'm saying.
Now, you guys have been, the village has been putting money into this fund, so.
So that
you know,
portion of it,
That portion of it can be used pursuant to the ordinance without restrictions.
So some of the 7 million was already used for land purchase, and the village has been subsequently filling in.
Putting money in.
So not all the 7 million is, and the 7 million, from what we read, and you're the attorney, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but the language says that by unanimous vote of the council, that money could be used for other purposes, to the point that Mr. Wallace makes, that would be our argument to the rating agencies to consider that money as part of their general fund reserve requirements.
Chad, by us having unanimous, we can't overturn that with a unanimous vote.
No, that's.
We can't do that.
Can't overturn what?
The grant.
The grant.
The grant
So
portion.
let me,
And that's,
Seven, eight.
says you can use it for,
Minus two,
Thailand.
because we bought
Or
it.
finance
Off
plan.
memory, but it was limited for purchasing parks and open
Yeah,
space.
that's what it's for.
so we've used it,
No, we
some of
haven't.
it.
Some of it we have, yeah.
Yeah, no, we've used some of it, so it's not like the total amount sitting there
We used 2.1.
correct.
is just,
Yeah. Somebody has to come back with that number.
Anything else?
so let me see if some of us ran on fiscal responsibility the last time, and this council has made a lot of progress in
I agree that
fixing,
you're in very good hands.
in fixing our financial controls, and it was so reflected in the audit, and I asked the gentleman twice on the record that we're getting a lot better, but clearly this discussion shows that we got a long way to go. And so dealing with $2 million to run it off, in this ad hoc scenario, you told me that the industry standard is 30%.
It's not an industry
Okay,
standard.
well, then tell me what
It's
it
a
is.
rating agency measurement.
Measurement. I would call it a standard, but if you want to call it measurement, I'll call it measurement. And yet, if you fail that, you said that subjectively rather than objectively, because 30% is an objective number, we can persuade the bond ratings of this kind of persuasion that can bring us in compliance with a top rating. So what we know for sure, objectively speaking, is that we're falling significantly below their measurement. But we can make an argument. So how this council, who is privileged to be leading the charge to our fiscal responsibility, take a position of this magnitude of transferring $2 million? I mean, I hate to ask you if you were sitting here what you would do.
It would depend
It would be
on what your
impossible
other-
to articulate that to a voter.
What would your other options be? We would have to evaluate what your other options would be.
Or we would simply vote this down.
No, I mean, I understand that part, but in order for you to vote yes or no, I think we would need to look at, what would be an option to the unfunded liability issue rather than just taking money from the general fund balance to fulfill it.
We don't have a problem with unfunded liabilities.
We don't?
Whether we fund it or don't fund it, that is not a problem. Not a problem. 90, 85, 80, it's still not a problem. It's still a fantastic plan if we were 80 compared to other cities and counties.
So then why,
5%.
And that is why this pension fund does not speak in support of this, I imagine.
if it's
And
not a
that's
problem, then I
why
don't know why
a
we
former
would.
chairman who knows a lot about the pension fund has spoken eloquent against it.
although he did say if he was still at the pension, he would be all
I
for
understand,
it.
because it's a different hat.
Depends on which side of his mouth
This
you're
is
next to.
Exactly where I'm sitting.
disappointing, the way this is being handled. But
All right, we have to make
I
a
don't know
decision.
what,
For a year.
Yes, I think we have to defer, and I think we're going to have to put this in the budget for 20. And then we're,
Deferring, we're voting, what are we
yeah,
doing?
we're having to move, there's a motion to defer, let's defer.
I'm sorry, who made the motion to defer it?
I think, no, I think,
Brett?
No, I didn't make the motion.
No.
It was actually.
I don't recall the
Councilmember Laredo
motion,
did.
that's,
no, there's been,
yeah,
we
okay,
took
I'll
a
make a
lot of
motion,
motions.
I'll move to defer to October 29th.
Second.
Is that a meeting date? I believe that's the meeting date.
Wonderful.
15th
yes.
and the 9th.
And so we're clear, what additional information is being sought to help the decision be made?
I would like to know exactly that 30%, not the should be included, but that will be included in our bond rating.
I don't think
which-
they can answer
They
that.
can't answer that, Brett. You got as much information on that
Yeah, I
right
think
now.
we've got all that
We're
information,
not, we're
so.
keeping it. We're not giving it to the bond fund, correct? At this point, unless we do something, it stays with us. It doesn't go to the pension fund, correct?
Madame Petros,
Correct.
Okay, fine.
But that's, you know where I stand on it.
I have
That's
I have
issue.
my motion on the floor to defer.
let me add
till
just a
October 29th.
clarification. I had made a motion, but it was so long ago that I don't know, that we would defer it, what the amount would be $1 million, which is roughly following your suggestion
Makes no sense.
that you would vote for $500,000, for half of it, to
I mean,
Are you
the other
retracting from?
option on the table is to put it at, and I know, Ed, you're gonna scream, but to put it at 500,000, which I think would take us over the 90%, and we could vote on this, because I really don't think, I think we defer it, and we're gonna end up in the same conversation, and the votes aren't gonna change.
What's the
That's
magic?
a good one. That's a good one.
What's the magic?
That's a good one.
That's my magic number.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion, to
I
put
second it.
500,000 towards this, and
And the end of,
put it to
Does
vote.
anybody have the valuation thing from Pete Strong with us? If you go look on that, you'll see it's about 60 or 64 million. I don't remember the PV of the benefits versus the PV of the.
but Betty, can you work
That is
on
your
it?
percentage.
But let's just, she made a very
I'll give you the
intelligent
mo-
motion that,
Yeah, the
I know you
motion's on the floor. We have a second.
Well, I'm sorry.
500,000.
For
There was
500,000.
a motion to defer,
Yeah,
and it
but
was seconded.
that-
You withdrew.
I withdraw,
You
I
withdrew?
withdraw my motion. I didn't think there was a second, but I withdraw it.
I'm sorry.
Thank you for whoever would second my motion.
Jennifer, get going, stop us.
Katie made the motion. I'm sorry.
I'm
Councilmember
making the
Petros.
motion to transfer
$500,000.
$500,000, which I think, given everything we've learned, is not going to have an impact on our bond rating.
I
I
second
also
it.
believe it would get us above the 90%.
Councilmember Loretta
Councilmember
seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
So you gotta do a roll call.
Well, that amends the ordinance. Is that right?
Apologies.
Oh,
Good
for the
call.
amendment.
Way to go,
Okay.
I'm
Rheta.
sorry, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Oh, good.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now roll call on the ordinance as amended. Councilmember Moss?
No.
Councilmember Petros?
Yes.
Councilmember Segurola?
No.
Mayor Davy?
Yes.
Councilmember
This
Laredo?
this would be to,
To adopt, as
To a-
amended.
by 500,000.
500,000.
Okay, it's not a double negative here, so yes, I vote yes.
Councilmember London?
No.
Vice Mayor McCormick?
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted on second reading. The next item is a resolution, and I believe I'll defer to the attorney, but there was talk about deferring these items. Should I read the titles?
I
We're
think,
going to withdraw them.
So let the record reflect that item 8A and 8B have been withdrawn. And the next item is a motion regarding funding requests by community groups by Councilmember Laredo.
Yes, we discussed last time sending a message, either a resolution or an ordinance. And I drafted some language and you gave me some input. The vice mayor said, if any. So I added that and circulated to you, I think. And it's basically saying, too, that we would develop some criteria, objective criteria. We cannot use the word grants. It's prohibited in the charter. And that then we would send out a message to the community that they would have to follow this criteria with timetables, et cetera, with a view to, I don't have it in front of me, but with a view to reducing their dependency on us if inapplicable. And let me tell you, today, this is a wonderful community. I'm sure you all know, within a week, we already have Pat Woodson, who took $29,000 or $28,000 grant, and she went in the and $10,000, raised it, and she called us all, and she gives us back $10,000. So we have to give her, put a statue, and it's the only time I ever saw anybody getting money and giving it back. That's the spirit of this motion, to try to get people to do it. And there's enough caveats, and all the decisions will be final by the council and not necessarily apply. But the message has to go out, and it has to be more formalized. And then, independent of this motion, which stands for itself, we talked about assigning Ignacio Segurola to draft that, to help draft that objective criteria moving forward for next year, because sometimes it's a little confusing. So it's basically to establish a criteria for applying with deadlines, and then to send a message that we hope that you can begin to plan to phase out. That was.
Councilmember Segurola, Petros.
I hope to have some sort of draft and proposal ready by the second meeting in October.
Councilmember Petros.
I like this idea of getting a handle and giving us parameters that allow us to be consistent. One of the concerns I have, and when you draft this, if you could think about the fact that there are some organizations that provide services for our community, that we benefit more from them doing this than having the government take it over. And so I don't want every community group, there are ones that would fit outside of this that wouldn't necessarily get weaned off. And we need to have language that allows us to put these things in two separate categories in some way. Is there a way to do that?
Vice Mayor, I'm sorry.
Absolutely. The way I'm foreseeing this and the research I've done with other municipalities, one of the questions I would like is for it to go, although it will all be submitted ultimately to the manager and then to the council, it would go through legal for the determination, which I think is necessary in every single case, whether or not something is a charitable contribution or not. So we know what's 7-0 and what isn't. And number two, there are definitely many different levels, and one or several of the questions on this application are going to be what consideration is the village and its residents getting back for the money being given. And consideration can take many forms, and sometimes, its tangibility is fluid depending on what is being requested, but that will most definitely be part of the process.
So, again, I want to thank you, Ignacio, for taking this on. I've been thinking about it a lot, too, and I want to make sure that we're staying true to what the vision of how the village has operated. Well, on the one hand, I think it is very important that we have sort of a process to go through so that we can evaluate these things and make informed decisions. And I hope, and I'm sure whatever you bring us will be a good roadmap to help these community groups to be able to provide us with the information that we need to make those decisions. My fear is in overly, making it too formal or too bureaucratic. My fear is that we're going to lose out on some of the things that are really amazing. We've seen through the years some great ideas and initiatives come out of our community, and some of it happens because of this organic ability to come before council and share your idea. And you might be really awesome at whatever it is your idea is, and you may really, really stink at being able to fill out the form. So I would like us, while we're thinking about it, to make the process such that we give different avenues and different opportunities. We still have the opportunity of people, while they certainly have to put things down on paper and doing it in uniform ways, good for us, they still are coming to us and they're sharing and we're still engaging with them. And the other thought that I had on the motion itself, I'm okay with the manager's office talking to people and telling them that we're thinking about evaluating this process. I do not think that the forms and the requests should come through the manager's office because they come to us. And my last thought on the subject is that I want us to be mindful of the fact, while certainly we should not be frivolous with any village funds, we spend so much time talking on what's about 2.5% of the budget. And this is a part that really engages our community and gets them active. And it's where, a lot of different people start with something like that and then they end up involved in village government. Maybe they run for council. So I want to make sure that we keep this process, while it needs to be systematic so that we can make good decisions, it needs to be friendly and it should be in communication with us, not with the manager.
May I propose the motion?
Councilmember Moss, and then.
Yeah, I just wanted, I agree with Councilmember McCormick. I never really thought that this was a major issue that we had. I really feel like Key Biscayne, one of the nice things is that we come and we keep the engagement one-to-one from our community. Our groups come here, present to us, show us the great things they're doing, and we make a decision whether we want to do it or not. What I get afraid and is that, we're stepping into this very formal process. Objective criteria makes me very worried. I don't really know exactly how you objectify it. I don't know what you will come up with, but it seems very subjective also. But for all these kind of processes and steps for these people to take, I think it can disengage a lot of people. And I feel that, we're starting to feel like we're going into maybe how a larger government would work, something that we've kind of tried to step away when we broke away from the county, is to get away from that and be engaged directly to our constituents. Again, and also to echo what Councilmember McCormick said, is that it's such a small piece of all the things that we're doing, and I really never even thought that this was a problem before. So for me, I don't know if I can really support this kind of motion in this direction that we're going in, because I'm afraid that we're going to disengage. I understand what we're trying to do, formalize it and go through a process, but I think it may actually hurt what we are about.
May I, since I made the motion, I happily withdraw it. Let me just tell you where I came from. And obviously I am, and today I believe that none of the language in this motion takes away from friendliness and all of those soft words that we created 27 years ago. But I do remember this year, even though it's 2% of our budget, that we spend 90% of our energy and a lot of divisiveness in this spirit of Key Biscayne and Key Biscayne Nice, because when Councilman Segurola asked some questions, legitimate questions, he got no answers because there was no record, and that just spinned out of control. And that 2%, I agree with you, took 90% of my emotional energy. This community was divided. This effort, which I now happily withdraw, was an effort to institutionalize in a nice way. I put all the words in it, so we don't have a repeat of this year, for which I personally am embarrassed. And I think we need to start working together more. And this was supposed to be a process. Objective criteria can be interpreted a lot of ways. And also, I put language that you suggested last time, like if, and on the words and all actions, if you read the thing, all final decisions regarding community goods will be made by the council. The injection of the manager, because I will withdraw the motion, but was because literally you have to have it somewhere. It's got to be in some office. We don't have an office. We don't have a secretary, folks. We don't have a salary. We don't have anything. So that was the only reason I injected the manager. Where are you going to turn in the objective criteria? But we went off into niceness. I want to get back to niceness. And this year's experience was very unnice for me, for all of us, and for the people who pay the taxes in this community. So that was my original intent. But happily, I'll withdraw it because I don't want this to become.
Vice Mayor, and then you can go.
Actually, I just want to,
Councilmember Segurola.
Just want to reply to a couple things. I completely agree with the spirit of what Councilmember Laredo said. What I'm foreseeing that we create is not something to restrict this. On the contrary, something to open it up. I don't foresee creating an overly complicated or bureaucratic method for this. I see something we could put on the new website where people fill out some information. And on the contrary, instead of making it harder, I think it will open up the doors to individuals and groups who may not know anybody up here, or who may feel intimidated to stand up on the podium and ask for money, or who don't know how the process works. I see it as something that will level the playing field and give equal access to whatever group, so that we can decide, I can't guarantee everything's going to be funded, but that we can decide what is a worthwhile cause for the village or not. And also, it just creates a record, so that if we say, okay, what did we do in the past, a future council can look back and say, oh, yes, they requested this for this, and this has been the track record, and here we are. I don't see us turning into the county or turning into the city. It's still going to be us. It's just going to create a paper trail that we can follow, and also give opportunities to new people. I think that is a very key part of this proposal that I see. Instead of restricting the people who have already requested money, I see it opening up to new people that may not know how to ask for it.
Vice Mayor.
So I want to thank Councilmember Laredo for taking this stab at this motion, and also for being willing to withdraw it. I think that this is going to be a very sort of delicate path that we have to walk to try to achieve exactly what you just said, Ignacio, because our intent now and the way we see it, maybe it will be interpreted differently. So I think we're going to have, in the future, I think we're going to have to be really, really careful with whatever we lay out as a process to make sure that we keep that spirit of openness. I love the idea, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting, of doing this along the same lines of we wanted to have on the website an access point for people to apply to serve on village boards. And I see this as the same thing. And I think the idea of having some sort of a record is a great idea, because for the first 25 years of the village, it was really easy to just pick up the phone and ask someone who was on council then what it meant, what it was. But what we're finding as we go into the next 25 years is that people maybe don't remember, or maybe we have a manager who wasn't here for 27 years, right? So we need to have ways to look back and to understand it. But I imagine that this is probably something we'll talk about quite a few times before we really settle on what the process is. And I think I think that's worth it, because I think it's important.
Okay, Councilmember London, Councilmember Petros.
I think we could have guidelines, basically guidelines saying these are the type of things. Doesn't be specific and say it has to be this, this, and this, but basically broad guidelines of what council will consider, and will also can be extraordinary if they're outside those guidelines, and what information we require when you make your presentation, which will really be very helpful. What kind of data, what are you going to do? What are the benefits to the community by you getting money from council, from the community? What are you giving back to the community? And I think if we had broad guidelines like that, it would help the people who are applying, it would help us make decisions. So I think if you want to have some broad guidelines like that, I'm 100% for that.
If I may just quick anybody here that wants to send me ideas, please through the clerk send me an email, and any member of the public that wants to send me ideas, please send me an email.
Councilmember Petros.
Okay, so that was going to be my idea. Maybe we withdraw the formal, as you did, your motion. We ask Ignacio to take a stab at this. I think your intent makes perfect sense to all of us up here. It reminds me of when I started trying to do the evaluation of the charter employees, and bring something back to us. Let's have it as a discussion item. Let's tweak it and see if we can come up with something.
And the word guidelines was a nice word.
It's
a softer word.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you, Ed.
I'm
a soft guy.
I know, but I just want to thank you for putting this forward. I think
it's
it's
okay.
right.
I just want to avoid this next year, please. We can't handle
This
it.
is my 9th year on this dais doing these budget things, and I don't think we've ever gone a year where we haven't discussed what the heck we're going to do about the community groups. So we're keeping a tradition alive in Key Biscayne.
Mike, I got one last thing. I want Katie to sleep well tonight. Right now, with $500,000, we'll give you a 90.57% funded ratio based not on the market value of the stocks that we have now, because right now we were over that. We're 92% before we even had tonight. The reason for that is what you have is a smoothing. You don't look at 1 year when they get the actuarial things, so you don't have these big loops. But if you looked at our market value of our assets, we were at 92% funded ratio, and right now you'll really sleep well. We're at 93.2 with $500,000.
Thank you.
So sleep well, dear.
Do you do
Mayor, may
actuary
I?
consulting? Do you do consultancy and actuary? I mean, you did that right there.
Can you send us a bill for that?
Motion to adjourn.
Mayor, may I,
Second.
just as a matter of,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, if you indulge me, I was praying that he would leave. Look, I am liaison with the Art and Public Places Committee. Board, and they're doing a great job. We've had a vacancy for a while. I nominated Bill Durham to be that, and if it's not, doesn't break, I like to, get this over.
I mean,
Does it have to be noticed?
It has been noticed.
No,
not for this
that we're
meeting.
going to appoint someone.
Okay, well,
Put it on for the 15th.
Can you give
I'm-
him like a smile like you like
I know
him?
you
I
brought,
haven't been able to get anybody on any board. Okay, and I just there are a lot of good people out there
All right.
that want to serve, and this has been going on now for over 2 months.
That's fair. I look, put it on the 15th. It'll be the first thing up. Okay, and tell Bill, yeah, I mean, he'll make us laugh.
I didn't know he was going to show up today, so I didn't want to embarrass him.
I think it'd be nice to have him again.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, he's a
He's
good
a
guy.
great asset to our community.
Okay, motion to adjourn now?
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.